Mendoza in trouble. It's out. Touchdown! Wow! A walk-on play. Unbelievable. Give him the Heisman Trophy now.
This past weekend, we saw one of the best catches in recent memory. An entire conference forgot how to play football, and some teams crawled 1 week closer to locking up their spot in the playoffs. As always, I'll put every team with a chance to make the playoffs into one of 5 categories. Mortal lock for teams guaranteed to make the playoffs. Lock bar and collapse for teams that are in as long as they don't shoot themselves in the foot in their last few games. Control their destiny for the schools who will make the playoffs if they win the rest of their games. Need a little luck is pretty self-explanatory, and lastly, pray. Although I'm not even sure if divine intervention can save some of the teams down there. Let's first, however, start with the fallen. If we're being real, these teams didn't really have a shot in hell anyway, but we will miss them all the same. Alright, back to the land of the living. No team in Mortal Locks again this week, but expect that category to start filling up next week. As for Lock Bar and Collapse, let's start with the 3 remaining undefeated teams just waiting to move up into Mortal Lock: Ohio State, Indiana, and Texas A&M. Ohio State breezed by Purdue. Texas A&M didn't have any trouble against Missouri, but Indiana had to come back with a miraculous drive to take down Penn State. This game is a massive point of contention in the media. On one side, you have people saying this game exposes Indiana a little bit as Penn State had 5 losses in a row coming in and started a freshman backup, while the other side is praising Indiana for being resilient and being able to eke out a win in Happy Valley. I won't get into it too much as I'm a biased Indiana fan, but a win is a win. And for the purposes of this video, it keeps Indiana in the top 2, with what should be an easy road to the Big Ten Championship and playoffs. Quickly touching back on Ohio State and Texas A&M, they both have 3 games remaining and could probably afford to drop 2 of them and still sneak in the playoffs. ESPN is giving all of these teams a 99% chance to make the playoffs, and you can't even bet their odds because it's that much of a certainty. Although I can't move any of them up to Mortal Lock because they could all lose out, I think we all know Samford isn't touching A&M, and OSU, who has looked dominant against everyone to this point, isn't going to be folding 3 games in a row. So moving on to the rest of Lock, Bar, and Collapse, we have Alabama. Their win over LSU is a monkey off their back, but the job isn't finished. Oklahoma this weekend is a big one for both teams. The Sooners will pretty much be playing for their playoff lives, while Alabama will be hoping to essentially lock up their spot. Eastern Illinois after that shouldn't be too much trouble unless that school has another future NFL quarterback just hiding in their wings. And Auburn just fired Hugh Freeze, so it would be disappointing to lose to a coachless under 500 rival. Currently sitting on a 96% chance to make it, with Florida State as the only blemish on their record early in the year, expect the Tide to see their way in. Sticking around the SEC, let's talk about Georgia and Ole Miss. I'm moving Georgia up from Control Their Destiny after they beat Mississippi State because I do think it would be a collapse for them to lose 2 of these last 3 games. Georgia can drop one of these and still get in with their resume, and they'll be favored in all 3. Also, having the head-to-head record over Ole Miss could come in handy down the road if both teams finish with the same record. And speaking of Ole Miss, they had a pretty easy matchup with the Citadel and only have 2 more games against Florida and Mississippi State. They're favored by 15.5 this weekend and should be favored by a similar amount in their final game. Texas Tech fans have to be on cloud 9 after this past weekend. College game day in Lubbock and a blowout against their main competition in the Big 12. This game was obviously a massive opportunity for both teams, and with the Red Raider win, the Big Ten now has a 3-way tie for first place, with very good odds for Texas Tech to win it. I'll get into those other teams a little later, but looking at the Red Raiders' schedule, I would consider a regular season loss a collapse. They're favored by 23.5 this weekend and should be favored by a few scores over West Virginia. Alright, I want to quickly talk about Tech's playoff positioning. Let's say they win out and win the Big 12, while Ohio State and Indiana win out and play for the Big 10. And Texas A&M and Alabama also went out and played for the SEC. Those teams would all be in the top 4 for bye positions heading into those games. And the committee has said and shown with SMU last year that they aren't keen on punishing conference losers. Would they change their tune to give Texas Tech a bye? It would definitely be interesting to see. However, if Texas Tech was left out as the 5 seed, they're almost guaranteed to get a group of 5 team as the 12 seed in their first round matchup. So maybe it isn't the worst thing. Let's wrap up this category with Oregon. Oregon was coming into a hard stretch to end the year and managed to get by their first obstacle by the skin of their teeth. Say what you want about this game, but playing Iowa at Kinnick Stadium in the rain is always going to be an ugly, run-heavy slugfest of a game where neither team ends up looking very good. The fact that Oregon got a win in that environment is impressive no matter how you look at it, and it's a game they can leave in the rear view as they turn to Minnesota this weekend. They'll have USC after that, and at Washington to wrap up their regular season. They're favored by 25.5 against Minnesota, so it would take another Minneapolis miracle for the Gophers to win. But USC and Washington should be interesting. USC will likely be fighting for their playoff lives in that game, which makes any team dangerous, and Oregon is 1-3 against Washington in their last 4 meetings. Of course, Washington just lost to a team whose passing leader was literally their backup punter, but things always seem to get interesting for rivalry week. Oregon can likely afford 1 loss, but not 2. Alright, before moving on to control their destiny, I want to quickly mention that I went ahead and made that college football website I mentioned at the end of last video called CFBspot.com. I threw it together this week, and right now it just features a trivia game where you guess where current and former NFL players went to college. There's a leaderboard system if you sign up that tracks the most you get in a row, so check it out and see if you can beat my high score. Also, let me know if you would want to see anything added, and again, it's cfbspot.com. I'll put it in the description. Alright, back to the video. Moving into control their destiny, let's look at 9th ranked Notre Dame. Up 1 spot after BYU's loss, and a little more comfortable in that top 10. Keep in mind, we are still using the top 10 as a benchmark for teams getting in through an at-large spot, as it looks likely that 2 of the 5 automatic bids will be given to teams outside the top 12. The Fighting Irish crushed Navy, which seems to be becoming customary at this point, and now has their biggest challenge since Miami and Texas A&M, with Pitt this weekend. These are 2 of the hottest teams in the country, with Notre Dame winning their last 7 and Pitt winning their last 5. Game day will also be there, which just adds another layer of excitement. But it should be noted that the Irish are favored by 2 scores. If the Irish come away with a victory, it shouldn't be too difficult for them to finish the regular season with 2 losses and a spot in the playoffs. But if they lose this game, they're done. They haven't played a tough enough schedule to be given any leeway with 3 losses. So park yourself in front of your TV early on Saturday because this one could get exciting. Heading south, we have 2 teams still in the same boat. It's Texas and Oklahoma coming off their bye weeks. A 7-2 record for each of them currently, and if they stay with just 2 losses, they will get in. Lose 1 more though, and they could receive similar treatment to Alabama last year, who barely missed out with 3 losses. Both of these programs are really up against it this weekend. At Georgia for Texas, and at Alabama for Oklahoma. They're both underdogs in these matchups, and rightfully so. A loss for either is devastating to their odds, but I'd argue it affects Oklahoma even more. Looking at their schedules, Oklahoma has no more ranked games after this, while Texas still has Texas A&M in a game that could give them enough of a jump if they win. Oklahoma is still on the outside looking in, as Texas has the head-to-head record over them. But with BYU losing, Texas now finds themselves as the last team in the current bracket. Pay very close attention to their games this weekend, as a win for either of them will catapult them up the rankings and drastically improve their odds of getting in. Let's move over to BYU and Cincinnati. BYU is coming off of a rough showing against Texas Tech, while Cincinnati is coming off a bye week. Cincy moved into the CFP poll at 25, and both teams have some dangerous home games this week, with TCU for BYU and Arizona for Cincinnati. Should they both win, it would set up a game between the 2 with massive Big 12 and playoff implications on the line. As we mentioned, these 2 and Texas Tech are currently in a 3-way tie for first in the Big 12, so whoever wins this game will have a massive leg up in making the conference championship, assuming they both win this weekend. We'll see how that matchup is looking after this Saturday, but either of these teams winning out means they will be in the Big 12 championship, more than likely against Texas Tech. Looking at our first group of 5 teams, we have USF and North Texas. James Madison fans must have fallen to their knees when they saw USF was ranked 24th and they were left out of the CFP poll, but more on that later. USF is the only group of 5 team ranked, which is massive for their cause. This basically tells us that if they are to win out and win the American Conference, they're in. Also, if I'm understanding it correctly, the American Conference tiebreaker comes down to CFP rank. So with the current 5 teams in the conference tied with 1 loss, USF ranks ahead of them and would be given a spot in the conference title. Looking at the rest of their schedule, at Navy this weekend could be tough, but really they should be winning out, where they would likely take on North Texas in the championship. North Texas also has a light end to their season with UAB, Rice, and Temple. If they win out, their only loss would be to USF, so they would likely be ranked at that point and would also be in the American Championship. It'd be a difficult task for them to get by a USF team that thrashed them earlier in the season 36-63, but with 1 loss, I would expect them to get in over a team like James Madison if they won out and won the Sun Belt. Georgia Tech and Virginia will make the ACC Championship if they win out in conference play. The capitulation of the ACC this past weekend helped Georgia Tech immensely, with undefeated in the ACC Virginia losing to Wake Forest and Louisville losing to Cal. These games really opened up the ACC even more than it already was, and makes it a lot more likely that this could end up being a one-bid conference. Even though Virginia lost this past weekend, because their game with NC State earlier in the year didn't count as a conference game, they are still tied for first, and their tiebreakers in the ACC are solid. Looking at Georgia Tech's schedule, they have to get by Boston College and Pitt to lock themselves in the ACC Championship. Beating Georgia in their final regular season game would really only serve to increase their ranking or give them a potentially much needed boost should they lose in the ACC Championship. I wouldn't want to put my faith in the committee, so winning the ACC is the path of least resistance here. For Virginia, they have to get by Duke and Virginia Tech. I tried a lot of different scenarios, and I still might have missed some, but from what I found, if Virginia wins out, they knock Duke out of the running as they would have to beat them. Pitt playing Georgia Tech would ensure that at least one of them gets bounced out as well, and their tiebreakers are good enough that they never really find themselves third of 3 in the event of a 3-way tie. All of this shit is really convoluted, but I couldn't find any way this team wins out and misses the ACC Championship, so if you find one, let me know. I'm going to end that group there, but immediately talk about Michigan and USC. I sat here and really wrestled with what group to put these 2 teams into, but at the end of the day, I still think there's too much up in the air for me to definitively say both would make it if they won out. For example, let's say out of these 2 teams that Michigan won out with this schedule and missed the Big Ten Championship to Oregon. Super impressive win over Ohio State, but now let's look at the current CFP poll. Say BYU won out and beat Texas Tech in the Big 12 Championship. Would the committee go back on what they said and drop Texas Tech out after losing a conference title game? What if Texas and Oklahoma went out and beat Georgia and Alabama this weekend? Would Michigan jump any of these 2 lost teams? I do think they would with the best win in the country, but I'm just not certain of it, which is why I have both teams down here. They have hard enough schedules that they could definitely jump up with wins, and if I was a fan of either team, I would be rooting for Georgia and Alabama this weekend to take out Texas and Oklahoma, as well as rooting against Notre Dame at Pitt. You basically need these bubble teams in front of you to just fall off a cliff, as doing so could allow you to crawl into the top 10. It should be noted that both of these teams still have a chance to make the Big Ten Championship. USC's best odds would be to win out and have Michigan beat Ohio State. This would essentially ensure their spot. Michigan would also have to win out if they wanted to make it, and doing so would ensure that Ohio State drops because obviously they play each other. They would then also likely need Oregon to drop one and USC to not win out to get in. Alright, having fun yet? Because it's only going to get way more confusing from here on out. Vanderbilt is a 2-loss SEC team ranked just outside the playoffs at 14. The reason they aren't up a group with the other SEC teams is because of their schedule. They only have 2 games left against Kentucky and Tennessee. And while Tennessee would be an awesome win for them, it probably wouldn't be enough to propel them into the top 10 without some other results falling their way. I would say Texas and Oklahoma losing this weekend would be very beneficial to Vandy, but really anyone above them losing wouldn't hurt at all. James Madison is in a tricky spot. They're clearly in the driver's seat to win the Sun Belt, but their attention will likely fall to the American Conference and the ACC. They'll either need the American Conference to have a really weak winner, or the ACC to be won by Duke. While it's usually assumed that the Big Ten, Big 12, ACC, and SEC get to send their champion to the playoffs, there isn't actually a rule about it. It's just the 5 highest ranked conference champs. Let's say Duke, who currently has the second best odds to win the ACC, actually does it with their 4 losses. Would the committee really have them ranked ahead of a 1-loss JMU? I doubt it. For now, they just need to win 1 game at a time and see how the landscape changes every week. Let's also just talk about Duke right now. It's borderline ridiculous that a team who will make the ACC championship if they win out finds themselves not even controlling their destiny, but here we are. Duke is somehow 4-1 in conference play and 1-3 out of conference, which is how they find themselves in this position with a 5-4 record. However, we just mentioned a scenario where Duke wins the ACC and doesn't even make the playoffs, which is why they need a little luck. This would be a doomsday scenario for the ACC, where they could potentially have no playoff participants. How can you not love college football? I don't know if the word I'm looking for is irony, but I find it hilarious the James Madison Duke fans are gonna have to be massive Duke Blue Devil fans to close out their season. There's always just one team that throws a wrench in the system, and if Duke continues winning, it looks like it'll be them. While we're on the topic, I'll just mow through some of the other ACC teams in this category: Miami, SMU, and Pitt. I'll start with Miami. They currently have very little hope to make the ACC championship, so their path likely lies with an at-large bid since they are ranked 15th. I want to show you something that I found particularly interesting. In the CFP poll, we see Alabama and Georgia ranked right next to each other with the same record, but Alabama is ahead because they won that matchup head-to-head. Georgia is then ahead of Ole Miss with the same record because Georgia beat them. Same story for Texas and Oklahoma, Texas Tech and BYU, USC and Michigan, and yada yada yada. However, Miami finds themselves 6 places back from Notre Dame with the same record, a team that they beat. It's very interesting because let's say these two teams finish with the same record of 10-2. The committee would likely not drop Notre Dame behind Miami out of nowhere. And while I do think Notre Dame is a different team than they were then, it would still be very controversial nonetheless. All of this is to say Miami has to win out and hope that a few teams slip up, and it's really going to be that same story for a ton of the teams we see down here. Pitt is another team that I really wrestled with in my head. I believe that if Pitt wins out against Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, and Miami, they should get an at-large bid, no questions asked. But I can't speak for what the committee might decide. Would they jump Oklahoma and Texas if they both finish with 2 losses? What about a BYU team with their second loss coming in the Big 12 championship? It's impossible to say, but I think the picture will get a lot clearer after this weekend. If Pitt wins and Texas and Oklahoma lose, which is pretty likely, I think the committee wouldn't have any way of keeping them out should they finish with just the 2 losses. SMU is in a bit of a different spot. It's the ACC championship or nothing for them, and getting there is only really possible if they win out. Here is their schedule: Louisville and Cal. They could win these games and still miss the conference championship though. If they win out but remain in a 3-way tie with Georgia Tech and Duke, they're out. If Duke and Pitt win out, they would have to rely on conference opponent win percentage, which is 3rd of 3rd in many sims. But we'll have a clearer picture of that at the end of the year. Best case scenario, a lot of these 1-loss ACC teams just beat each other and drop a few more for SMU to make their second ACC championship in a row and potentially their second playoff in a row. Tulane ruined the fun for Memphis this past weekend and gave themselves a good chance to compete for the American Championship. They currently have the 3rd best odds to win the thing behind USF and North Texas. Should they win, it would likely be a toss-up between them and JMU, but I would give JMU the edge as they're ranked in the AP poll. So Tulane would likely need to win out and also have JMU drop a single game in order to make it. Lastly in this category is Utah. Looking at the Big 12 standings, it is possible for them to make it, but really unlikely. I think their best bet is an at-large spot since they're ranked just outside of the top 10 at 13th. Their last 3 games are tough though, but I'm not sure if winning any of them will really be impressive enough to the committee to move them above anyone. Because of this, and like many teams in this bubble area, they'll have to be rooting against a lot of the teams in front of them. Alright, now let's finally check in with the teams in the pray category. Louisville's only hope is through the ACC Championship, and seeing as they lost this past weekend and now have 2 ACC losses, they need all of those teams with 1 ACC loss to start losing in droves to stand a chance of sneaking their way in. Boise State, UNLV, and San Diego State. San Diego State had a pretty good chance as of last week to challenge the other group of 5 winners until they got throttled in the last game of the night against Hawaii. Now all 3 of these teams need to win out, win the Mountain West, and pray that the American Conference falls apart, James Madison falls apart, and that Duke wins the ACC, so pretty unlikely. Kennesaw State somehow found a way to stick in the prey tier, but with 2 losses, no big wins, they basically need the same stuff as the other teams in the Mountain West. Next. In the Big Ten, we have Iowa and Minnesota. I honestly think I have better odds of winning the Powerball, but technically, if they win out and Indiana loses out, Ohio State drops at least 2 of their last 3. Among other things like Oregon losing and Michigan losing, they could still barely make the Big Ten championship. So Hawkeye and Gopher fans, just enjoy it while you're here because you'll be gone soon. Memphis, Navy, and East Carolina. We already mentioned Memphis lost to Tulane and Navy lost to Notre Dame over the past weekend, but East Carolina actually picked up a win. This weekend, Memphis and East Carolina play each other, which will definitely knock out at least one of them, but who are we kidding? None of these teams have a chance in hell. Moving over to the Big 12, we have Arizona State, Houston, TCU, and Arizona. Full disclosure, I didn't even have Arizona in my last video as I didn't think it was possible for them to make it, but DraftKings is giving them odds to somehow make the Big 12 championship. If you are an Arizona or TCU fan, I beg you, please do not waste your money betting on this. You would get significantly more enjoyment out of just physically burning whatever you were going to bet. Houston and Arizona State actually have a chance, but they need to win out and have an ACC-like implosion at the top between Texas Tech, BYU, and Cincy. And lastly, Tennessee. I caught a little flack for, I guess, shitting on Tennessee a little bit last week when I complained about them being ranked. They're clearly a top 25 team in terms of talent, and their record doesn't reflect how good they are. In all honesty, they were just kind of dealt a shitty hand with Georgia, Alabama, and Oklahoma on their schedule. If they won just one of those, they would be in the same realm as Texas and Oklahoma, but they didn't. And now, even with winning out, they would need a miracle to even sniff the playoffs. So there we have it. We cut some fat from some of the tiers, and the playoff picture has gotten a little clearer. This weekend will show us even more, and personally, I can't wait. Don't forget to use my website, cfbspot.com, if you get restless before the games, and I'll see you next week.